Okay, so that brings me to Act 2. US troops go in. What was their mission? So, as I've mentioned, the US troops were part of a multinational task force known as UNITAF. The mission of UNITAF was quite precise. It was to secure the ports and airports and to secure roads that would permit the delivery of food aid to people who needed it. And it was geographically relatively constrained to the southern portions of Somalia where most of the fighting was taking place. It was a very significantly sized operation, in total 40,000 troops, anchored by 28,000 Americans. All right. And it had a relatively limited time frame. Started in December of 1992. It was supposed to wrap up its operation by March of 1993. So there's only just a few months envisioned for UNITAF. Well, what was going to happen next? Well, the plan was for UNITAF to give way to a second UN operation known as UNISOM II, a United Nations operation in Somalia to follow on to the first one. Now, if we look at the mission and resources of UNISOM II, you see that it has a much more expansive mission. Its goal is not simply to continue helping civilians at need, but to help in the reconstruction of a broken country. It was supposed to disarm the belligerent factions, to monitor the ceasefire, to make sure that armed groups weren't cheating on it. It was supposed to aid in the political reconstruction of the country, the economic reconstruction of the country. It was supposed to train a Somali police force that could help keep internal order. It was supposed to clear the country of landmines. In other words, a very expansive mission for this UNISOM II. You'll see here, though, that its resources were considerably smaller than the UNITAF operation. Here, UNISOM II was envisioned to have 28,000 total troops. US forces were going to draw down quite considerably, not leave entirely. 4,000 US forces were left in the area to support UNISOM II, and an American general was put in charge. But what you can see here, I think, is you should see here at least two problems with this mission as it's envisioned, where UNITAF is going to come in force to deliver food aid, and then UNISOM II is going to take over and deal with the bigger problem of reconstructing the country. So the first problem that you see here is that the US forces, when they go in heavy and strong, are there to treat a symptom, but not the underlying disease. Right? It's important to remember that this famine is not a natural disaster. It's a product of a civil war. All right? And so, but they're not being asked to solve the civil war. They're being asked to feed starving people. All right? So you have the US going in to treat a symptom, not the disease. And in fact, the US tried very hard not to get entangled in the civil war, even as members of the UN were pushing us to take more active action against the warlords and the militias there. All right, so our operation was never designed nor intended to lead to a permanent solution to the problem. The second challenge facing this mission is the obvious mismatch between goals and capabilities. You have the most powerful country in the world delivering food to people. And then the much more significant problem of patching together Somalia and turning it into a functioning country again is going to be handled by a less heavily armed, less capable United Nations force drawn from 37 different countries. Okay, so the mission by design is not all that well planned, right? Now, it doesn't make a lot of sense from a policy perspective. It does make sense as a response to the needs of US policymakers. On the one part, it reflects the preferences of the military. This was a time when Colin Powell was the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. The so-called Powell Doctrine was really quite influential in US decision-making, which argued that US military force should be used, overwhelming force, in support of limited, clearly defined objectives with a clear exit strategy, a way to get out. Right? And the mission, the UNITAF mission, was tailored precisely to meet those requirements. The objectives were limited, and it had an exit strategy. That exit strategy went by the initials UN. Right? So you had to pass it off to the UN in order to get out. It also responded to the needs of politicians. First Bush, but then Clinton, who's going to take over this operation, who comes into office not believing that foreign policy is a major priority, having significant economic agenda to enact. And that's the desire not to get the United States involved in what was called nation building, right? A term that we come out of Vietnam as a very pejorative term, the kind of mission that's unpopular, potentially very costly. Right? So the desire to narrowly tailor this mission is going to reflect the needs of the military and politicians, even if it's not well suited to the needs of the country that we were going to save. Okay, so in the spring of 1993, UNITAF gave way to UNISOM II. As I already mentioned, the US retained a role, 4,000 troops, and a US commander in place. But what we find is that as the mission of the operation in Somalia became more expansive and potentially riskier, US troops were getting out, but not entirely out, just enough to get into trouble. And this is going to bring me to the next act, which is mission creep.